It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Later this hour, saving the bees, raising monarch butterflies. Some of the things that we do that we think are helping nature might actually be counterproductive. We will find out why and talk about other things that really can make a difference. But first, the Loess Hills in western Iowa are a unique and beautiful landscape. The hills were shaped by wind and are home to some of the largest tracts of native prairie in the state. The new Loess Hills Hiking Guide from Golden Hills Resource Conservation and Development highlights 20 places to hike and explore. The guide is the work of Seth Brooks. He is the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Program Coordinator for Golden Hills. Hello, Seth.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Tyler Ruge is also here, naturalist, park ranger, and event coordinator with Monona County Conservation. Hi, Tyler.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have both of you here. And before we really dive into what makes this area so unique and so beautiful, I want to talk about the fact that although the Loess Hills have been part of Iowa since long before Iowa became a state, it wasn't really until the last few decades that we really understood how unique and special this landscape is. Seth, when did you learn about the Loess Hills?
Well, I'm from Nebraska. I grew up not too far from the Loess Hills, but growing up, I wasn't really, aware of it. We were always kind of aware of the bluffs as you drive, north or south on Interstate 29. And then I worked in Western Iowa after I graduated from Creighton University. And I was always aware of it. But then when I lived overseas for a number of years and I moved back and then I started recreating in the Loess Hills because that was the closest place. And that's kind of where I really started to learn more about the Loess Hills was, about 6, 7 years ago.
Were you kind of surprised that you didn't know more?
Uh, I mean, yeah, because I always loved to travel beforehand, but I wasn't too much of an outdoorsy type of person before, growing up. And so when I moved back, I was. And so obviously the Loess Hills was kind of the logical place to go because it was, the closest kind of ecological region to go and explore.
How about you, Tyler? When did you first learn about the Loess Hills?
So very similar to Seth, I grew up in Nebraska, and the entire time I was growing up, nobody had ever really talked about the Loess Hills. I didn't find out that the Loess Hills were a unique landform until I actually got hired by Monona County Conservation. That was something that just kind of came up through the job interview process and kind of working this job is this landform's unique, but growing up, nobody ever talked about it. So.
Well, let's talk about what makes this so special. As I said, these hills are shaped by wind. That's one of the things that makes them really unusual, and the height and the depth of these hills. Tyler, tell us more. What makes this area so unique?
So yeah, these hills were formed kind of at the end of the last ice age as a result of the glaciers grinding the soil and rock underneath of them. They retreated, and that soil became it was very light, almost akin to what you would consider like flour. And the wind blew it up, deposited it, and we only see this land formation to this depth here in Iowa, and it does extend into South Dakota and down into Missouri, but the majority of it's here in Iowa. So we got the vast majority of the unique landscape, but we also see it overseas in China. These deep, these hills are anywhere from 300 feet tall from the surrounding floodplains. Less soil is found in other places, but that's what makes it unique is it's this depth of the hills of the less soil is only here.
And much of this land has been preserved, not because we knew how special it was or we were making an effort to preserve it, but Tyler, it was preserved because it wasn't great for farming, right?
It's very steep terrain, and it makes it very difficult to run plows and seeders and tractors and stuff in. There are parts of the hills that are definitely seeing agricultural use or are being used as backfill for road projects and whatnot over the decades. But yeah, there was the hills kind of protect themselves a little bit.
And over recent decades, there really has been a movement, not just to preserve these native landscapes, but also to connect some of the untouched parts of the Loess Hills. Can you tell us more about that, Tyler?
Yeah. So, I joined this knowing about the Loess Hills pretty recently. But what I've seen since I've been here with Monona County is there's a lot of interest in finding the areas of the Loess Hills that have what we call remnant prairie, prairie that has yet to be disturbed by tractor, plow, grazing, anything like that. If we can find those areas, we want to preserve those because they're going to be examples of that unique ecosystem that hasn't been disturbed too much. We also want to preserve other areas that we can and, convert that back to native prairie. And that's also something that people are interested too.
Well, and of course, this area hasn't. It's not been a secret. I do think we've talked a lot more about it in maybe the last 30 years than we were before. But Tyler, last time you and I talked, it was the 50th anniversary of the Loess Hills Prairie Seminar. So this is not a total secret, right?
No, no. People have been coming to the hills to recreate and experience the unique ecology and stuff here for quite a few decades. It's definitely more of a concern of getting the word out to highlight how unique this is. I think that's one thing these hills kind of suffer from is like Seth was saying, I grew up in Nebraska too. We always knew, oh, it's the river bluffs, the hills. That's kind of it. Being from the area, I never had that unique appreciation for how interesting this place is, ecologically speaking. And so trying to get that word out, let people know that, hey, this area is pretty neat. You don't always have to travel hundreds of miles away to find something new and exciting in nature. You might have it in your backyard.
Now, Seth, you had proposed writing a hiking guide for the Loess Hills before this. Tell me where you got that idea.
Yeah, so I had mentioned that I had lived overseas for a number of years, and then I moved back in August 2020, so kind of right during the height of COVID. And I wanted to, get some physical exercise, but also be safe about it and not go to the gym. So I started going to Loess Hills and I started going hiking a lot. And then I found myself spending a lot of time trying to find out where to go. And so I wrote a proposal to a publisher, for a hiking guide about the Loess Hills, and they liked the idea, but then they just thought, well, we like the idea, it's just too small of an area. So they proposed I write a hiking guide for Nebraska, which led to writing a hiking guide for Iowa and also for Kansas. And then through that whole process, I got a job at my current job, Golden Hills. And it's always been a dream of Lance Brisboy, who's our executive director, to produce a Loess Hills hiking guide. So it was kind of a perfect kind of match. And after a few years, we finally got some funding, and now we're here with the Loess Hills hiking guide.
So you have written hiking guides for three of the states in this country with the fewest acres of public lands.
Yeah, that's correct. That's kind of my I kind of laugh when I say that. I've written hiking guides about the three states with the least amount of publicly accessible land, which kind of highlights that, yeah, there's not a lot of places, in Iowa or Nebraska or Kansas, and you might have to drive far, but you can still go find those places. And like Tyler said, you can still find joy and recreate in places in your backyard that you might not expect.
And we may need a little more help finding those places in these states. What's your approach when you create a guide like this one? I mean, there are lots of trails online and things like that. The All Trails app is a pretty popular one, but you don't feel like that is comprehensive enough, right?
No, it's not. Sometimes with apps like All Trails, and I don't want to single them out, but they might not have the full information, and I always like to go to the land managers first, because they know the lay of the land, they know the trail conditions, they know what are fire breaks or what are trails, and they can kind of give you tips on which trails are better and kind of unique parts of the park or public area that you're going to. So that's where I always start, with places like Monona County Conservation, where Tyler works, or the Iowa DNR, or any of the other number of land managers in the Loess Hills.
So when you started looking for that information, was it somewhat hard to find?
It wasn't hard to find. It was kind of dispersed in different locations, and sometimes it was harder than others. but yeah, it just took an effort to try to kind of compile that information. But then when I started working on this hiking guide for Golden Hills, I just kind of had that experience of just through my work through Golden Hills of knowing these places and kind of developing some of the relationships with the land managers. So it was pretty straightforward and pretty easy once we got to work on this current hiking guide.
So you've got 20 places to hike and explore that are part of this guide. How many miles did you hike in preparing this guide?
It was probably well over 200 miles. Yeah, so I hiked it, and I got some help from Lance. He hiked a couple of public areas in the southern Loess Hills. But yeah, last October, was September, October, November. I was hiking all up from the northern Loess Hills down through down all the way to the south to Waubonsee State Park. And I was doing it with a 360-degree camera held on a selfie stick. So yeah, all those miles I was walking holding a selfie stick. So I ran into a few people that were just out hiking, and they were kind of curious, and they're like, "Hey, who's this guy out here walking with a selfie stick?" And so I kind of explained the project to them, and they were really excited about it because they thought it was a resource that was greatly needed for Loess Hills.
Right. And so the reason that you carried that camera with you is that you have a grant from the Guilford Foundation funding a trail mapping project. So your goal, and we only have about 30 seconds here, we can talk more about it after the break, is to have this camera, 360-degree mapping available for all of these trails?
For most of them, yeah, for most of them, and we're still in the process of uploading that imagery, that 360-degree imagery to Google Street View. But you can go, for example, Waubonsee State Park, you can go fire up Google Maps and look at the 360-degree views of the trails before you hit them.
All right, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. We are talking about the new Loess Hills Hiking Guide from Golden Hills Resource Conservation and Development, which highlights 20 places to hike and explore in the Loess Hills. Seth Brooks is the author of the guide. Tyler Ruge is a naturalist, park ranger, and event coordinator with Monona County Conservation. You can find hike information and maps online at goldenhillsrcd.org/hiking and information on how to get your own guide. This is Talk of Iowa. It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Coming up in 20 minutes, we'll find out why some of the things that we do to help nature might actually be counterproductive, and we will get some better ideas. But first, we are talking about the Loess Hills in western Iowa. Unique, rugged, beautiful landscape. The hills were shaped by wind and are home to some of the largest tracts of native prairie in the state. Now there's a new Loess Hills hiking guide from Golden Hills Resource Conservation and Development. It highlights 20 places to hike and explore. The guide is the work of Seth Brooks. He is the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Program Coordinator for Golden Hills. Tyler Ruge is also here, naturalist, park ranger, and event coordinator with Monona County Conservation. And this is a paper guide, and people can pick it up at local nature centers if they sign up for the Golden Hills newsletter. You can also make a donation to Golden Hills RC&D and get a copy sent to you through the mail. But also, Seth, you've made these maps and this information available online as well. It feels like you are doing everything you can to make this information as accessible as possible.
Yeah, the goal when we made this is we wanted it to be, available to the public, widely. And so, yeah, the paper guide is a 5 by 7 inch guide, 60 pages front to cover. It's got maps in it. It's got kind of logistical information and some recommendations on, civic trails maybe at these parks. And then it also it breaks down the hills in northern, central, and southern regions. And each of those regions, we recommend additional 5 places in the guide. And then, yeah, on our website, we have more detailed maps that the public can print. They're bigger. They're 8.5 by 11, so they're going to have more detail on the maps, and those are free for the public to download and print. And then also you can access the links to the 360-degree imagery on Google Street View on our website as well. So yeah, the idea was just to make this available to the public. Just so they can go out and enjoy the Loess Hills and recreate. And then with the hopes that, they find that the Loess Hills is a special place that needs to be preserved and protected.
So you have broken up the Loess Hills in your guide into three different regions. First, I mean, they stretch all along really the Missouri River Valley, or a lot of the Missouri River Valley. How many miles are we talking about with the Loess Hills?
Uh, well, for example, the Loess Hills National Scenic Byway kind of stretches from right on the border up at South Dakota near Akron, Iowa, and then all the way down past Hamburg. And that's the byway is 220 miles. So yeah, roughly like 200 plus miles. The Loess Hills stretches from its northernmost reach all the way down to the Missouri border.
All right, so we're covering a whole lot of territory here, and of course that is not all wilderness by any stretch of the imagination. But why don't you pick a place in each of these regions, kind of just to tell us about that you really think is worth a visit, Seth? I mean, starting with the northern region.
Sure, yeah. In Woodbury County, Southwood Conservation Area, I think is just a beautiful place. You can camp there, you can fish there, you can also ride horses on the trails there. And then when I went there to do the trail mapping last October, it was just spectacular, the fall colors. There's actually a quite good diversity of tree species there, so you can see, a different color palette that you might see in other parts of the Loess Hills just because of the trees there and the trails there they're very well maintained by Woodbury County Conservation. So yeah, that's a really great place.
Okay, so
Not too far from Sioux City.
Southwood Conservation Area is the name of that place. Let's talk about the central Loess Hills. What's a location that you really love there?
Well, this is one of my favorite places in the Loess Hills, and Tyler is very familiar with this. This is Sylvan Runkle State Preserve. It's managed by the Iowa DNR, but it's right by the Loess Hills Prairie Seminar site. And then, in fact, a lot of the programs at the Prairie Seminar take place at Sylvan Runkle State Preserve. And there you can see kind of the iconic cat steps that you find in the Loess Hills, which are just a natural formation. You might think they're made by cows. But yeah, it's just kind of the less soil sloughing down the hill.
What do they look like? What makes them unique?
Well, they look like yeah, like cat steps, kind of little ledges on the hills as because less likes to stay kind of cut vertical, and so when it's kind of at an angle and it gets some water in it, kind of slowly erodes down the hill and kind of creates these kind of ledges that look like almost like cow paths have created on the side of hills.
Okay, and now let's go south. Do you have a favorite area down there?
I really like Folsom Point Preserve. It's about 15 minutes from the Omaha Council Bluffs Metro. It's managed by the Nature Conservancy, and there aren't maintained trails there, but there are kind of like well-worn footpaths there. And this is one of the largest remnant prairies in the southern Loess Hills. It's a little steep to get up to the ridge, but once you get up to the ridge along the footpath there, the views are just are spectacular.
And do you have a favorite season to hike in the Loess Hills?
Fall for sure. I'm not a summer person because of the humidity and the bugs. The fall is great because there's less bugs, and the weather's cooler. And then yeah, when the fall colors start turning, it's just really beautiful. Not just the trees, but also the prairie as well.
Tyler, you may be a little more biased towards Sylvan Runkle State Preserve, even than Seth is. But do you have a favorite spot that you like to hike?
So some of my favorite locations in the hills are going to be our wildlife management areas, one of which is right next to Sylvan Runkle, and it is the site of the Prairie Seminar. The Loess Hills, I think it's the Loess Hills Wildlife Management Area. I think it's somewhere around 1,000 acres. And I go hunting for turkeys and deer, and so that's kind of my area that I like to run through and check things out and stuff. So I tend to spend a lot of time there.
Any other spots you want to point us to?
That's the one I spend most of my time in. I spend a lot of my off time hunting, and so I'm always checking out the wildlife areas and hiking through and like Sylvan Runkle and stuff like that. That's where I tend to spend most of my time.
Well, I want to bring another guest into the conversation here. I'm talking with Tyler Ruge. He is naturalist, park ranger, and event coordinator with Monona County Conservation. Also with us today, Seth Brooks. He is the outdoor recreation and tourism program coordinator for Golden Hills RC&D. He's also the author of the new Loess Hills Hiking Guide. And now joining us is Jason Taylor, president of Bur Oak Land Trust. Hi, Jason.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
And Jason, although you're based in Johnson County, which is a long way from the Loess Hills, you also spend a lot of time in the Loess Hills doing prescribed burns. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate to be a part of what's called the Cooperative Burn Week that takes place every year in the spring out in the Loess Hills. And it just is it's one of the best examples I know of organizations coming together for a good cause. And so much prescribed fire needs to happen in that region to try to support the fire regime that was removed so many years ago. But a lot of the problems that we're seeing out there, namely the eastern red cedars just encroaching upon all of these areas, a lot of that stuff is managed best with fire. So what we do with the Cooperative Burn Week is they get together over 100 people per day, 40 plus agencies. It's nonprofits, it's Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, it's Nature Conservancy, it's Bur Oak, it's other land trusts, it's volunteer fire departments, the DNR. All these agencies come together and we go out and we burn. And for the entire week, we try to burn as much as possible in a safe manner.
So there have been efforts in recent decades to make more land public and make more of the prairie contiguous and things like that. I mean, Jason, that this prescribed burning has to be a big part of that effort.
It is, and it's difficult because I think historically what would happen is you would have a property that's owned by one agency, the DNR, and they would go out and they would burn that particular property. Now what they're doing is they're saying, okay, who owns the land around us? Is it Nature Conservancy? Is it a private landowner? Can we get permission from them to burn that property as well? And so we're looking at it on a landscape level, not on a unit by unit level. And when we're talking about the acres that need to be burned annually, that's really the only way that we can make headway out there.
And you mentioned eastern red cedar. Eastern red cedar is a native tree. We are talking more and more about the importance of native plants in our landscape. Why is red cedar a problem?
Yeah, it's a great tree in the right areas. And so what happens out west, and it actually happens all over Iowa, is red cedars will start encroaching into the prairie areas. They do not grow well in areas that have a lot of fire. But as soon as you take that fire out of the equation, those cedars will just spread. And oftentimes, if you've ever been underneath cedars, you'll have pretty barren areas underneath them. And so you're really impacting the biodiversity by increasing the number of trees in those areas. So there's great pictures of the Loess Hills over the ages where you can see cedars just marching across the landscape. And it is fairly easy to kill cedars. You can cut them down. They don't re-sprout. But we're not talking about one or two. We're talking about tens and tens of thousands of eastern red cedars that are just everywhere out there.
Well, Iowa is the most altered landscape in many ways. And even though the Loess Hills are not a good place for most agriculture, there are areas that have been dramatically altered. How do we know what they looked like before settlers moved into the area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's one, we have some aerial photography, and that's obviously much post-settlement,
right.
But we're talking about the 30s. There are some areas that you can still see what that native landscape was like by looking at those aerial photographs from the 30s. We do have the Andreas Atlas from 1876. That's a phenomenal resource, and it goes through and you have hand-drawn maps of every single county in Iowa, and it'll show you in 1876 what was out there. And so in Johnson County, for instance, you can see a lot of the native areas. They'll show you prairie, there's barrens, there's various things, and then there's just a tiny little house here and there, and that's where all the communities were. And so by utilizing those resources, we can see what was on that landscape in that settlement time.
Well, and I think when we think about wilderness, when we think about wild places, we do think about kind of overgrown landscapes. And the Loess Hills, the prairies of the Loess Hills, that was historically a pretty open area, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are places out there where you may have a couple trees per acre, especially in the upper hills. On the slopes and at the top of the hills, you wouldn't have very many trees at all. And that often was because there were fires out there pretty routinely, and fire is going to kill a lot of those small saplings. Down in the areas where you have riparian zones, and so rivers, creeks, streams, you're going to have a more saturated soil, and that's where you're going to have a lot more tree growth historically in Iowa. And that was across the entire state. Anywhere you had a lot of rivers, streams, you're going to have more tree growth. Now, when you remove fire, the trees have the ability to really go anywhere they want to. Maple trees will grow up in the middle of a prairie where historically they never would have grown there because of fire.
Tyler, I want to go back to you. Both you and Seth grew up near this area and didn't know a whole lot about the Loess Hills. Obviously, we have been learning more. Local people have been learning more as well. Do you feel like there's a real need for local communication, local education, so people who live in this area have an understanding of how special it is?
Yeah, I think that's very critical, is getting your local population to be aware that they have something unique and special in their backyard. And, it starts with awareness, and then hopefully you can get to the point, and this is kind of where my job comes in, of education and just kind of fostering that appreciation and that relationship with that landscape. And hopefully you get to the point where the local population is some of the most vocal supporters of that local landscape. And then it just takes off from there and, provides protection and interest. People will really they'll go protect what they care about, but they can't care about it if they don't know about it.
When you do programs with local people or local kids, what things do they get most excited about?
I've seen most people tend to get the most excited about our education animals, and I always try and we have a lot of native species that I always try and tie back to the hills, this area specifically, that they rely on that ecosystem. With kids, it's a little tougher, but with adults, talking about the hills, talking about these species that at the moment they're finding super super cool and interesting, it's like they can only exist where they have a home in the wild. So if you want to see these guys out in the wild, you got to care about their home too.
Seth, what kind of a response are you getting to the hiking guide?
We've gotten a great response so far. A lot of people have kind of thanked us and said, this is something that's needed, or they're just really excited to go, get the guide and kind of go explore new places that they might not have known about before this guide.
Well, I am thinking about, I spent a lot of time in the Sioux City area when I was a kid, and we just really didn't even know how to get to these places or where to go. You ran into that yourself, Seth, just a few years ago when you started. So I can imagine there are some people who are incredibly excited to just have access to this information.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a place like the Loess Hills State Forest that has 4 different units. I think now they have over 10,000 acres. That's kind of quite overwhelming if you want to go visit. But now, hopefully, with this guide and some other work we're doing with the Friends Group, the Loess Hills State Forest, that is just going to make that public area that much more accessible so that people can go know, like, where are the trails in the Loess Hills State Forest, where are the kind of highlights and the scenic overlooks there as well.
So as I mentioned earlier, you have a ton of information available on your website, goldenhillsrcd.org/hiking. And there are a couple of different ways people get their hands on this guide. But you also mentioned that you are still uploading this camera footage that you got from your 360-degree camera. So what is your vision for the future, Seth?
Hopefully to add some more of the trails to the 360-degree imagery. We didn't get all of them. And also there's some places, like Sylvan Ruckle State Preserve, like we didn't trail map that because there aren't maintained trails there. There's kind of footpaths there. So we might consider just going and mapping that just so people know where, hey, there's a footpath here and this is where it goes, but just know that it's not maintained. So and then, yeah, we might, there's also trails in the floodplain, for example, at DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge, which part of it does lie in Iowa. There are trails there. So, we might look at expanding that. Golden Hills also recently hired a trails coordinator to do some work in Potawatomi County. So we're just looking to expand and promote the different recreational opportunities in Western Iowa.
It's really exciting, Seth. Thank you so much. And Tyler, in 30 seconds, how would you recommend people get involved in really supporting this work in the Loess Hills?
There are a variety of organizations that always will need volunteers. They will always need, donations to help support their work. They can always come to the Loess Hills Prairie Seminar. It's a free weekend-long event that Monona County Conservation hosts. That's a great way to connect with a lot of these people, and just get involved from there. Just reach out to people, reach out to your local organizations, your county conservation boards, anybody you can talk to.
Tyler Ruge is naturalist park ranger and event coordinator with Monona County Conservation. Seth Brooks is the author of the Loess Hills Hiking Guide, and he is with Golden Hills RC&D. Again, you can find more information about these trails and the guide online at goldenhillsrcd.org. We'll have more from Jason Taylor of the Bur Oak Land Trust in a moment. This is Talk of Iowa. It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Thanks to some excellent public awareness campaigns and some shifts in our culture, more and more Iowans want to do something on their own land to support nature. Many of us want to support pollinators, monarch butterflies, and other native species. But some of the things that we do to support nature might actually be counterproductive. Jason Taylor is the president of Bur Oak Land Trust, and he's here today to dispel some myths and help us help nature more effectively. Hello, Jason.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And this conversation grew out of the fact that this is something that you share when you give public talks, when you do education. What made you realize, I need to address some of the things that people do that are very well-meaning actions that just really aren't making the difference they want to make?
I kept hearing a lot of the same answers to questions where I would ask them how they're helping pollinators or how they're, what bees are important to support, what butterflies are important in their world. And I think that the answers that I was getting back often would be, here's how I think I'm helping. And I just wanted to, gently let them know that some of those things weren't necessarily productive for the species.
Right. But there are things that could be productive for these species. So, let's start with monarch butterflies. We all love monarch butterflies. We've seen the populations decline over the years, and a lot of people are planting milkweed for monarch butterflies, and that seems to be making a difference. But also one of the things that we see are people feel that collecting monarch caterpillars and raising them in captivity is a good way to protect them from the things that might befall them in nature. Why is that not a good idea?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that everything I'm going to talk about is really through the lens of biodiversity. It's not through beauty, and it's not trying to make people feel better or worse. I'm not trying to be mean to people, but the reality is there's a lot of research that shows that the life cycle of the monarch butterfly is very complex. And what people see is that if they go out there and they collect eggs, they're going to have the ability to actually raise those monarchs to adulthood and then release them. The problem is that it impacts their life cycle in ways that we really do not understand. And the research is very new. There's been going on for a number of years, but it's also pretty poorly funded. And so there's a lot of questions we still don't have. But what they're finding is a lot of these larger groups like the Xerces Society, and there's a lot of great researchers that are looking into the migration patterns. They're finding that the captive raised monarchs just have differences to them as opposed to those raised naturally. They have smaller wing sizes. And as you can imagine, for something that's going to fly around their whole life, that's a bad thing. They have a different coloration. So that alone just tells you that something is going on in their growth. Their wings are just simply not as strong. And one of the biggest things is that there is some very interesting research that has shown that monarchs that are captively reared have worse navigational skills. And the reason that this is so critically important is the super generation of monarchs, the monarchs that are going from the caterpillar stage into the adult stage right now, they're the ones that are going to be flying down to Mexico. And as you can imagine, if you have a species that needs to fly to Mexico, they need to have pretty good navigational skills. And so any small difference that we're kind of creating that is weakening their ability to do so is actually a very bad thing for the population as a whole.
So let's just circle back to the things that you can do to support monarchs. What are your best recommendations?
So I'm going to say the same thing for pretty much everything within conservation, and that is create good habitat. It is a lot of work to create a good enclosure for monarchs and to keep it clean and to go out and find milkweed on a daily basis and to collect eggs and to do all those things. It takes a lot of work to do it right, to do it well. Or what you can do is you can plant good native species in your yard, including milkweed, but not solely milkweed, and then let it grow. Let nature take its course naturally. And you're going to see butterflies eventually lay eggs on those milkweeds and other species. And some of them are going to be killed by wasps, and some of them are going to be killed by spiders and praying mantises and things like that. But that's nature. And the reason that they lay thousands of eggs is because in nature, they're not all going to grow up to be adults. And so they have a response by laying more eggs, knowing that only a small percentage of those eggs are actually going to be raised into adulthood.
Let's talk about other pollinators. I think that part of the awareness about the importance of pollinators really did get a huge boost from concerns about colony collapse syndrome with honeybees. So I remember starting to see all of the T-shirts that said "Save the bees." But honeybees are not native pollinators. So tell me a little bit about the relationship between honeybees and our native pollinators and what we've learned about that.
So Iowa has phenomenal bees. We have over 300 native species of bees. That includes 16 bumblebee species that are in Iowa. In North America, there are 46 different species of bumblebees. So there's a lot of really cool bees out there. Most of the bees in Iowa actually are solitary bees. They don't live in any sort of colony. So the issue that we have with honeybees is that there are a couple different species. They're all from either Europe or the tropical areas of Asia. And when they are brought into an environment like we have here in Iowa, they have the ability to communicate amongst the colony very well. And what that does is it allows them to go find resources, food, that can support their hives in a much more efficient manner than the solitary bees or the bumblebees would be able to do so. And so we have a lack of habitat already because there's so many acres that have been turned into something other than prairie. We have so many yards that don't have anything in them for the bees to use. And now you have honeybees coming in and just absolutely dominating the areas that are left. And so that is one of the major problems. The second problem is they introduce a lot of pathogens into the native populations. So these are an agricultural commodity. Honeybees are an agricultural species in the state of Iowa. And what happens is they become just these vectors for a variety of different things like mites and viruses. And when they go out and they are on flowers and they're on different, plants in the area, they aren't on flowers separately from bumblebees. They will, touch each other and they'll transfer those diseases. And so we're bringing them in. They have a lot of problems associated with them. And unfortunately, it is absolutely negatively impacting the diversity and the number of native bees that we have.
I think one of the plus sides to this Save the Bees campaign has been a greater understanding of some of the dangers of pesticides like neonicotinoid insecticides. Do you think that when you look at the overall balance, do you think it's been positive or negative to have this focus on honeybees?
I think the focus on bees is good. I think that the sole focus on a single species is often bad. And it's good because it's a poster species that you can talk about. And so honestly, it's the same thing with monarch butterflies. We have a lot of butterflies that are in peril, not only in Iowa, but in North America or the world. But people know about the monarch butterfly. So in some ways, it's good to have that poster child to be able to talk about. In this case, the bee that was chosen, unfortunately, is the bee that we should not be necessarily concerned about in this area. And so when people think to themselves, okay, how can I help the bees? Then what they say is, I'm going to create a beehive. I'm going to be an apiarist, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to start, producing honey. And so they do the thing that is the opposite of what they should be doing, which again, in this case, if you want to help bees in general, the best thing to do is to create good habitat in your yard. It's also way easier. Anyone that has tried to establish a beehive knows it is a lot of work. And so you can bypass all of that, do the right thing, and just create good habitat in your yard.
And I know also we like cute things. We like, a thing that you can buy that looks like an insect house and things like that. But habitat itself is so much more important than whatever cute, fun item you might be able to buy at the lawn and garden store, right?
It is. And a lot of times when you have those things, sometimes they're used, sometimes they're not. I've seen a lot of like bee hotels and things like that. Sometimes they just avoid them altogether. So it's not the worst thing. However, sometimes they will congregate there, and then that's where that disease transmission can happen. So it isn't always a good thing. Again, the best answer is what is natural. Honestly, this is a bit of a hot topic, but I'm not a fan of birdhouses. I'm not a fan of bird feeders. It's the same thing that you have as before. You're adding an artificial component to a natural process, and so people want to help. They want to see the birds. That's fantastic. But instead of attempting to do things in a non-natural way, because it's kind of fun and pretty and all of that, do it in the natural way by providing those good resources for them.
Of course, another thing that a lot of us do to support nature is plant trees. You are not going to tell me that planting trees is a bad thing, but what's the most effective way? If your goal is to support nature, what's the most effective way to think about planting trees?
Yeah, I can't speak negatively about trees. I think our friend Mark Vitash would come down here pretty quickly if I were. But the reality is that trees are good. Iowa is a prairie state. That's the reality of it. There is a lot of amazing forested land in Iowa, and we've lost millions of acres of forest. But what we have is again, people with best intentions. They want to go and they plant trees because that's the thing that seems easy to do. The reality is that you really want to think very hard and carefully about where you put those trees, and then also the species of trees that you are putting in. Making good selections can change the whole dynamic of your yard. And so Doug Tallamy, speaks very broadly about the use of oaks. Obviously, I'm a fan of oak trees. Putting an oak in your yard is a fantastic thing to do. Again, make sure you're putting it in the right location. Anytime you have the ability to plant native species, do so. Don't bring in cultivars and things just because, again, they might be a little bit prettier, but the natives are going to do very well. The other thing that I absolutely encourage people to think about is look into shrubs. Iowa has lost so many of its native shrubs because we have invasive species coming in. And so now instead of having, some native shrubs in an open woodland, it's absolutely thick with things like buckthorn and honeysuckle. So we've replaced our shrub layer in the state of Iowa with invasives. That doesn't mean that shrubs are bad. It just means that we need to be very, very, we have to understand like there are some very good native shrubs like viburnums that do a lot of good things, including, helping out pollinators, birds, things like that.
All right. So think about planting native trees. Think about planting shrubs. Dead trees are also really, really good habitat for a lot of species. I mean, we have this urge. Obviously, we don't want to do anything where we're leaving something dangerous in our yard or landscape. But we have this urge to clear anything that dies. Is that something we can do that's positive for nature, is to leave a dead tree behind if it's safe?
I'll go a couple steps further. So yes, dead trees are phenomenal. You do not want them, obviously, in areas where they're going to fall onto houses and things like that. But at the same time, they are great for various species. In the back of my yard, I live along Ralston Creek. In the back of my yard, I had a dead tree that had a family of woodpeckers this year, which was amazing to see. Going one step further, you should have dead brush piles in your yard. One of the best things to do is to create vertical space in your yard, as well as the other native species. But by putting piles of sticks down and vines, and you're creating a completely different environment, a completely different level for all those species that could utilize that. One of the best things that you can do is have a yard that does not look neat and tidy. And I know there are a lot of towns in Iowa that require it, but a lot of people are pushing back on that. And so I think that I'm not saying just to have an unkept yard, but at the same time, you can do it well where you have good natives, you have a lot of diversity in the type of habitat. So you have dead trees, you have live trees, you have shrubs, you have native grasses, you have native plants like flowers, but then also have things like those brush piles.
All right. And getting rid of invasive species is something that a lot of us spend time working on our own landscape or volunteering out in the woodlands to try to make a difference. What are your priorities? What are the invasive species that you consider to be our highest priorities?
Ooh, that's another big one. So everyone, when you talk about invasive species, people go towards things like garlic mustard. And garlic mustard is bad, not even in my top 5, to be honest. You have things like round leaf bittersweet. Bittersweet is a forest killer. There are areas when that comes in, it is very difficult to get rid of it. And unfortunately, there are people that are still, selling wreaths of bittersweet at farmers markets and things like that, and it's spreading across the state. Buckthorn is another really bad one. The pear species that are very ornamental, like Callery pear, those are another one that people are actively still planting. Those can be, there's parts of in Iowa City on the east side where there's a lot of pear. And there are a number of species that people are seeing, and then there's also the ones where you really have to go out into the timber and see. You're not going to necessarily see them in someone's backyard.
All right, so you're not as worried about garlic mustard as you are about these other items. And do you have a recommendation for people, a resource that people should look to when they do want to do something good, a place where they can look and come up with a good plan?
Yeah, the Iowa State Extension obviously has great resources for invasive species removal, and so I absolutely trust what they're trying to do there. There are some individuals like Doug Tallamy that talks a lot about trying to create these habitats in your backyard. There is no one perfect answer, and I think that's the reality. And I'm never going to shame someone for not doing all the right things. I can absolutely tell you that I have some honeysuckle growing in my backyard right now because I haven't gotten to take care of it yet. So I would say just see what your other people in your community are doing, and again, try to do as much as you can for native habitat.
Jason, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Jason Taylor is president of the Bur Oak Land Trust. He mentioned Doug Tallamy. The website homegrownnationalpark.org is one of those resources. Talk of Iowa is a production of IPR News. This episode was produced by Danny Gear with technical support today from Nev Kelly. I'm Charity Nebbe. This is Talk of Iowa.